top tip for you, if you want the best blackberries, go for the ones towards the tip of the tendril.
I just reply back with a photo of something like Roger Phillips's mushrooms. Just open on one of the pages that shows about 20 different species, which all look the same and are all white. I mean, at this point, there's always somebody going, yeah, but I've always eaten raw elderberries. Yeah, okay, you're fine. But they contain a cyanide-inducing glycoside. Identify everything. Identify everything you're going to put into your mouth or to your kids' mouths or wherever. Don't do it based on I think it's that. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Wild Food People. Right, this is a foraging episode. This is all about going into a hedge and finding things there and woodlands and stuff like that, but it's not a hunting episode. But if you are listening to us for those times when we do talk about hunting or fishing or wild protein of one type or another, then don't turn off, because this is for you as well. Everyone should be foraging as well as hunting, fishing for the table. It's all part of wild food. There, you've been told now. And if you are still listening and you haven't just turned the podcast off because why is this man shouting at me, then good. Thank you for still being here.
Yeah, we do appreciate you not turning off, because that's Richard tries to tell you to do something and says, right, if this isn't the way you're doing it, then you're wrong. No, that's not what we're saying.
Is that mansplaining? Or is it just aggressively marketing the podcast within its own episode?
I mean, the way that I see it is that you're trying to let people know what we're going to be talking about in this particular episode. And this particular episode is all about foraging, particularly foraging in autumn, or the fall for Americans.
We're not going to say fall because that is an Americanism and it's stupid.
I just thought I'd get one little bit of,
oh God,
you know.
But if you are listening to this next, I don't know, March 2025, this is going to be a very autumn-heavy episode.
It is. It's maybe one you want to bank for later.
Yeah, or at least revisit. Yeah. But we are going to be talking about our tips for foraging in the between now and Christmas, basically.
Now being August. September, nearly.
By the time this episode comes out, it'll be September.
Yes. So yes, it will be.
What is it, the 27th today? Something like that?
29th
of August. Which means next week it is September. And for me, September really that's the start of autumn.
It is, yeah. It definitely is. You could say it's edging on the end of summer, but really autumn is definitely pushing its way in. Yeah. In September.
If you're the sort of person that notices nature, and if you're listening to this, you probably are. You won't be listening to this podcast unless you have an interest in the natural world and what's happening around you. Mm-hmm. If you are the sort of person that notices things, then you will have seen that the leaves are starting to change colour already. I mean, summer never really arrived in terms of extended periods of warm weather or anything like that. We had a few days here and there. But
we did. It was what now has become termed a typical British summer, where we have like a week of summer and that's it. Yeah. It's been quite dry. That's one thing I would say for this year. It's been dry and cool. Yeah. I think this summer. Yeah. And the vegetable garden and a lack of produce thereof kind of indicates that.
Yeah, but everyone I speak to who's got a vegetable garden has said, "Oh, it's been a terrible year. I've not done this. I've not done that."
It has.
Yeah.
Yeah, it genuinely has been. It's been too cool. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about things growing in the wild.
But the weather bit of that does matter, because what is going to be available in September, October, November is partially dictated by what was happening this summer and in the spring, because this is the time we're coming up to for the autumn that's the time of fruits. Whether those are squishy berry fruits, whether they are nuts, or whether they are fruiting bodies of mycelial threads. We'll talk about mushrooms.
What you did there.
Oh, we're going to talk about mushrooms at the end. But what is available now is partially dictated by what was happening in the spring, what happened over the summer, how wet it was in the summer. It's been a fantastic year for growing generally. It's just not been a fantastic year for sitting out in the sun.
No.
But every farmer around here has had an extra cut of silage, or they're on second hay now. A lot of them. We don't normally get that in this part of the valley.
No, we don't.
The harvest of crops hasn't been particularly great because they grow, but then you need a period of dry to harvest them. But for things that will keep growing as long as it's warm and wet, it's been a good year, which means we have a lot of fruit around.
We do.
But the things that made the fruit were the flowers. It was the pollination in the spring will have affected the amount of flowers that got pollinated. Basically, every time you see a berry, think of it as a flower that got pregnant. There was a lot of impregnating going on in the spring, and the conditions over the summer have been right for a lot of moisture being pulled up out of the ground into the stem of that tree, of that shrub, or whatever it is, to produce lots of fruit. Because what happens some years, you get very poor pollination. So that could be because you get late frost and it kills all the flowers.
Yeah, I was going to say the frost. I think the frost last year was a big thing, and that's what killed off a lot of the plum blossoms. So anything in the plum family, so sloes and damsons and things like that. We had a bit of a poor year around here because we had a late frost that just killed the blossom, which meant there was nothing there to pollinate essentially.
And if you don't get that pollination, you won't get the fruit.
No.
But this is one of the things we try and get across on the courses, that it's not just about what's happening now. What you're seeing now is part of a chain of events.
Yeah.
And you've got to be interested in the whole chain, the whole series of events, to be able to predict what's going to be available. So a frost in the spring would knacker the availability of fruit in the autumn.
Yeah.
Also things like strong winds, heavy rain. We've had that before, where basically all of the petals have been blown off the flowers, therefore the insects are less attracted to them.
You get a lower pollination rate. Or if you have a drought in summer. If you have a drought in summer, then trees will tend to stop putting energy into producing fruits, and they'll sometimes drop things early. They'll drop nuts early.
Before they're fully formed.
Before they're fully formed, or they just don't have enough moisture. So any berries that you pick are just dry. Really, they're not good. They wouldn't be successful as seeds for the onward propagation of that plant's DNA either, because at the end of the day, all of these things produce fruits as a way of dispersing their genes further afield. It's not got anything to do with us and eating them. It's
we're just as far as that tree is concerned, you eating the fruit from it, you're meant to be taking the seeds, passing them through your digestive system and depositing them somewhere else. That's what it's expecting you to do.
Exactly that. So it wants those berries to be full of moisture and tasty so that things eat them, but at the same time the actual the health of the mother plant itself, as it were, is more important to it than its offspring, particularly for things like trees and shrubs, which live year after year after year, perennials, rather than annuals.
Because growing fruit, whether it's a nut or a soft fruit, is an expensive process for that species. For that
hugely.
tree, for that shrub, it's an expensive thing in terms of resources, in terms of sugars, in terms of water, overall energy. So at some point in the summer, if the conditions aren't right, that tree, that shrub will be making a decision going, right, what are we going to do this year? Are we going to put the effort into putting the roots deeper because maybe the water table's changed, or we're going to get less water where we are? So let's grow roots instead this year. Or is it going to grow more leaves and expand out like a lot of the trees have done this year? We've got some fantastic growth on the oaks and hawthorns and things. Or is it going to do all three, which I think it has done this year, where it's been good growing conditions, abundant resources. It's been a good year if you're a tree.
Yeah, I would say so.
So that's the thing for the autumn. The fruits that are available to you now, that die has already been cast. That's you've got what you've got. Just like last year, you had what you had, which was a little bit less. just like the year before, where we had very, very poor nut harvest in 2022 and 2021 because of the drought in the spring and the summer, which meant all of the nuts just fell off the tree in late August, early September, and they were just hollow, nut-shaped things without any meat inside of it. Whereas Amy's just cracked open a hazelnut on the table next to our little impromptu podcast studio in the woods, and that's great. There's a hazelnut in there.
It is. It's a good-sized hazelnut. It's reached maturity as well. Often round here, not in this wood so much, but other places, squirrels get to the hazelnuts when they're still green. So, but this one's got to that lovely golden brown colour which you expect from a hazelnut, and there's a full-size nut in there. It's great.
Yeah.
I sound incredulous because it's quite rare in this particular corner because of all the squirrels and birds.
Normally you just get hazelnut-filled squirrel rather than hazelnut.
Yeah, or empty shells. That's the other thing, because they seem to know which ones have got nuts in and which ones don't. And they just leave all the empty ones for us to find. Yeah. So in terms of fruits, there's loads of blackberries around at the moment.
Yeah, we are. I was trying to think of fruits throughout the summer as sort of a onward progression. So you get wild strawberries, particularly those tiny alpine strawberries you get by the side of footpaths.
Yeah.
Then raspberries.
Yeah.
Then bilberries.
Yep.
And if you want to hear more about bilberries, then go along to Scribehound, where I've got an article all about bilberries that I wrote a couple of weeks ago. But I think it's rather good. So there's links to that in the show notes below. But bilberries, these little small mountain wild blueberries that we have here in the UK, which you find in the moorland areas and you find in acidic soils, and they're absolutely fantastic. We're sort of coming to the last third of their really good season now.
Yeah.
So then blackberries are next.
Blackberries are next. I'd say around here I'm noticing the blackberries in the valley are coming into kind of full flush.
Yeah.
So they're coming to that point where it's not just a few. There's a decent amount on any particular patch that you go to, and they're still good because the best blackberries are the blackberries at the beginning of the season. That's when they have the best flavour. It tends to be when they're the most juicy as well. Top tip for you, if you want the best blackberries, go for the ones towards the tip of the tendril.
Yes.
They've been scientifically proven to be the best flavoured blackberries on a bush. And then the further you go through the season, the blackberries, they basically ripen from the tip of a tendril all the way back to the ground where it first comes out. And the ones that ripen first at this time of year are the best. I think it's partly to do with day length and amount of sunshine and the nutrients that are available, because the further we go into autumn and towards winter, the shorter the day length, and also the plant will start to... They don't photosynthesize as well. You notice the leaves on the plant start to change colour because they're starting to turn into autumn. So they won't be creating as many sugars. So the fruits will change flavour. So, yeah, that's my top tip about blackberries, is to go for the ones at the tips and use them soon after you get them. Because if not, anything that's been laid in them, any little eggs, will start to develop.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you take your punnet of freshly picked blackberries, you put them in the fridge for tomorrow, and you come back and you find that all the insects have come out and now escaped around the fridge. Oh,
there's that, yes. Yeah. Or if you leave that, you forget about them, you think you'll use them in a few days' time, and that's given everything time to develop. Yeah. That's the other one. So blackberries are the kind of keystone memory that I have of foraging when I was a child.
Yeah. They
are the thing that without fail we would go and do every single year.
Blackberries, at least in the UK, are kind of a foraging gateway drug. It's the thing you do first. It's the thing that gets you hooked on it.
Yeah.
And it's the accessibility as well of them.
Oh, definitely is.
Because some of the best blackberries are in urban areas.
Yeah. Yeah.
On old railway lines and canal towpaths, and I've had some fantastic blackberries that are just growing wild, sticking out through a chain link fence on the edge of some horrible manky industrial ground.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think they're also one of the easiest fruit to forage and to start with and to do something with, because there's so much there. There's so many available in such quantity for extended periods of time. There's very little habitat disturbance that happens from picking them.
Yeah. They're safe to identify as well. They're dead easy.
Yeah, because anything that looks like it is going to be one of the same sort of things.
Yep.
They're an all-round good one.
They are.
They are a good beginner's foraging item. And if you're not foraging for blackberries, then you're probably not listening to this podcast.
No. Final thing on blackberries is that I also really love the fact that you can pick a blackberry, and even if you are following that, the ones closest to the tip will be the sweetest, the juiciest. You still don't know until you eat that particular blackberry whether you've got a good one or like the tangiest tangfastic ever that you're about to put into your mouth. So there's an element of risk, but the risk is that you pull a face like you've just sucked a lemon, which isn't terrible. So,
and for me at this time of year, they're quite a good impromptu foraging snack.
Yeah.
Because I'm on this stupid diet thing at the moment, and so I put a load of weight on when I snapped my ankle in February, and I became the fat of the land. So I'm now back to the weight I was. Well, actually, back at the weight I was when I was 30, which is quite nice.
It is. For you.
Mostly that involves not eating very much and starving yourself. And the day before yesterday, I was up in the other woods, milling with a chainsaw, cutting these planks of oak out of this big log, and I hadn't eaten for quite a few hours at that point, and there were just blackberries off to one side. So I was doing one pass with a saw and then having a blackberry, and then another pass with a saw and having a blackberry, and these little bursts of sugar were absolutely fantastic. They got me through, but then I got to about the fifth or sixth one, and it was the tangfastic, awful, really sour version, but I still ate it.
Did you feel like you were channeling your inner ancestor, as it were, because you're out working on the land and rewarding yourself with fruit that you're picking from the side of the track?
Maybe, I don't know. I don't think my ancestors had problems with over calories, or the pasty and cider diets that got me into this place in the first place.
Your ancestors before the pasties, going back a bit further, but yeah.
Maybe, but this is the thing, this is the reason we like sweet stuff, is because we overconsume it naturally, is because our brains are still giving us the bio reward that they would have given to our ancestors for, you came across a really nutrient dense source of sugar, right, eat the whole thing because it might be the last time you see it for 6 months or a year.
Gorge yourself on it, and then
whereas now it's just chocolate,
more chocolate, So what's after blackberries in your calendar?
This year I think it's going to be elderberries.
I'd say so. They're starting already.
Looking at what's available, I think they're coming up next.
Yeah.
Possibly plums, bullaces,
yeah,
damsons, maybe?
Yes, definitely, actually. Yeah, we've got damsons and bullaces here and elder. It's tricky to tell because depending on how far north or south in the country you are, or how close to the coast you are, some of these things will basically peak at the same time as well.
Yeah.
So, but definitely elderberries and anything plum.
The elders seem to have arrived early. They've been ready early this year, but there are still some that are green and hard.
There are.
But there are some that are basically falling off the cluster already. Elderberries are another interesting one because you do need to cook them to make them safe to use. I mean, at this point, there's always somebody going, but I've always eaten raw elderberries. Yeah, okay, you're fine. But they contain a cyanide-inducing glycoside, which in quantity will make most people ill.
Yeah.
So cook them to help break that down or start the process of breaking it down. But you need to cook elderberries to make jams or wines or sauces or anything like that. So it's what you're doing anyway. Don't do raw elderberry smoothies. I found one blog, and there was some Instagram famous chef from years ago who published it in her raw food cookbook thing. Yep. And she had raw elderberry smoothies, and everyone pointed out that was basically a death smoothie.
Yeah. There was, Yeah, that was back in 2020, and it got pulled off the shelves, so you're unlikely to come across it, but yeah.
It's still out there somewhere.
Just your warning.
The other thing with elderberries is take all of the stem off.
Yeah.
So just have the berries, get rid of all the stem. The stem will make everything you cook bitter.
It will. It flavours it horrendously.
Yeah.
You can use a fork. A fork is the perfect tool for it. You can hold the cluster of berries from the main bit of stem and then just use a fork, like a rake almost, to pull the berries off. Yeah. And that gets off a lot of the stem. There might still be a few tiny bits which won't affect elderberry flavour too much, but you don't want any of the thicker stem. And as little stem as possible within that. Elderberries are also ridiculously good for you because they contain a high amount of vitamin C and other different chemicals which help your immune system. Yeah,
this is not just woo herbal medicine. There were quite a few studies that were using it as a prophylactic against swine flu, which is in the family of coronaviruses, and it is something that has been studied again and again. Elderberries, you've got Sambucol, sort of as a commercial over-the-counter cold and flu remedy, and then it's the Sambuca or Sambuca nigra extract is in various other medicines and different things, also in Sambuca.
Yeah.
Like whether Sambuca is medicinal or not is probably down to your...
I think you can make that decision yourself.
Yeah, certain cocktails certainly seem medicinal.
They taste medicinal.
Yeah. So plums and bullaces and things like that, that's just more identifying the difference between a plum and a damson and a bullace is probably your hardest challenge.
Yeah, they do look very similar, some of them. Yeah. There's also a lot of hybridization goes on with them because they're all the same family. So they cross-pollinate, and then you end up with the stones from the plums, which won't then be true plums of that particular species and things. Yeah. So it's like apples. Apples do the same sort of thing. So you can see apples out in the wild which aren't actually true crab apples because...
Yeah, they're wilded apples.
Yeah. But they all still taste really good. And again, with plums, you can't really go wrong in terms of them being toxic.
No.
They'll just have varying degrees of flavour.
Yeah, and if you look up any kind of plum liqueur recipes or plum alcohol infusions and things like that, there's a lot you can do with a plum.
Yeah,
or
sloes.
Or a damson.
Sloes are a type of plum.
Yes, sloes are. Well, maybe that's the next thing to talk about, because sloes, they're ready earlier this year as well. Everything's ready a little bit earlier.
Yeah, they are.
So the sloes, we're going to start collecting our sloes. So if you don't know, sloe, S-L-O-E, not as in moving slowly. They are the fruit of the blackthorn shrub, Prunus spinosa, and they are. I mean, like, if blackberries are the foraging gateway drug, these are the ones that you get hooked onto, and then there's no going back after that point.
Yeah, I think they're the one that encourage you to experiment and do more things.
Yeah,
with
lead to poor decisions.
Yeah, that's more the alcohol that you infuse them into.
So sloe gin is probably the easiest and most notable recipe for it. And
that's the classic recipe for sloes.
Which is just an infusion of the fruits into gin with sugar. Yeah. But it's worth talking a little bit about the shrub overall. The blackthorn is an interesting one because I've said everything's an interesting one.
You have. But foraging itself is interesting.
Well,
all of these things are interesting.
So blackthorn, it's odd in that it flowers before the leaves come out.
Yep.
So you get these beautiful white flowers covering the hedgerows in spring before the leaves turn up.
Yeah.
So there's something called blackthorn spring, which is this point where you get all these flowers out, and it's weird to see a flower out there at that time. So blackthorn versus hawthorn. Blackthorn, the flowers are out first. Hawthorn, you always see the leaves out first. Yeah. But the flowers themselves individually look very, very similar.
They do.
But blackthorn, the flowers come out first, and that means you've got that really precarious period because they can come out around the first frost, or the last frost of the year.
Yeah.
So
it's around March time, normally March into
Yeah.
April. And that is the time where you sometimes get a sneaky last frost, which, as you say, will kill them off.
Yeah.
This happens with other plum species as well, but more so with blackthorn because they are the earliest to flower.
Yeah. And we've got a good year this year. We've got a lot of sloes coming out this year. Even a branch I was trimming off from the little walkway between the fields earlier today had about 50 on it.
Oh, wow. Did you save them?
No, they've gone on the bonfire because we have
Thanks.
plenty of spare. But they will be ready soon. So you can tell when a sloe is ready when you pick it up and if it's a little bit squidgy.
Yeah.
If it's hard still on the outside, it's not ready. But it needs to be, even with a little bit of pressure, it'll give a little bit on the skin and the flesh.
Yeah. The flesh or the skin also goes that really dark colour, doesn't it? Because they have that bloom.
Yeah,
they have
like a white coating.
Yeah, like a white coating. But when you rub it with your thumb, if they're ripe, then that will be really dark purple to black colour underneath, isn't it?
And there's this, it's not an old wives' tale. It used to, because it used to be just the advice. It used to be what you had to do, which was you would either have to wait for the first frosts of the winter before you picked your sloes, or you'd have to prick each one with a pin. So there's quite a thick skin on the outside of a sloe, and the flesh underneath is quite soft, but the skin remains quite thick. The reason you would wait for the first frost is that if you think about all the moisture under that skin, it's like sort of a water balloon, and the freezing action makes all that water expand, and it breaks open the skin a little bit, which means when you throw them into your gin or your clear alcohol, then it will infuse out through that hole in the skin, through the damaged skin.
Yeah.
If you prick them each with a pin, it does the same thing. You don't need to do that now because almost everyone listening to this has a box somewhere in their kitchen that if you open it and stick your hand in, it's minus 18 degrees C or so. Everyone's got a freezer now, or access to a freezer. So what you can do is when your sloes are ripe, pick them, put them in a Ziploc bag or a plastic bag and put them in the freezer, because that gives you the same effect as the heaviest frost you would ever have got in October or whenever.
Yeah.
And it means that you can harvest them when they're ready and use them when you're ready. Because we've got sloes in the freezer from 2 years ago we still haven't made use of.
We do.
Actually, we had an argument about it earlier this month because Amy said I couldn't put any more meat in there because the freezer was full. I said, what's it full of? And she pointed out all the fruit. So I pointed out that she said she was going to make jam and she hasn't made jam. And now we've got a freezer full of fruit and no jam.
Yeah, but neither of us really eat jam at the moment.
And give it away. I can barter for it. I don't know.
Can we barter it for meat? That would work. I'm happy to do that.
Maybe.
Yeah. We'll think on that one.
So, sloes. If you're going to make sloe gin, there's a recipe on our website, but it's pretty easy to do. And the same recipe that you would use for sloe gin, you would use for sloe whiskey, or sloe vodka, or bilberry vodka, or bilberry gin, or whatever. It's basically fruit plus sugar plus clear alcohol plus thyme.
Yeah. Thyme is a real key factor. That is what makes it taste really good. The longer you leave it, the more the flavour develops. And then at the end of the day, if you strain it out and you still want it to be a bit sweeter, you can add sugar syrup. That's always an option with making any kind of fruit flavoured alcohols.
Yeah. We tend to actually make ours slightly under-sugared.
Yeah.
So we can sugar, because it's easier to add sugar than it is to take it away.
Exactly. Like you can always sugar up, but you can't sugar down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sloes for gin, jams, game sauces, there's no real use for them raw apart from sucking all of the moisture out of your mouth the moment you bite into one.
You're just waiting for the day when you can give our godson a sloe to bite on, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I just like ruining children's lives by saying, here, try this sloe.
Or crabapple. Basically, try this disgusting fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've also got to point out here the other risk that comes from sloes and blackthorn, which are the spikes. So there are tiny little thorns on blackthorns, and there are huge, great walloping thorns on blackthorns.
Yes.
And you will not spot the great big ones because they'll be disguised as branches.
very, very well. They even have leaves growing off them.
Yeah, off the thorn. And then hidden underneath all that is this very sharp, almost hypodermic sharp thorn that will stab you, and then the tip will break off in your skin. So this will almost certainly give you an infection of some type. And speak to any hedge layers, speak to any people who work with blackthorns regularly or work with them in the winter. Blackthorn infections in your hands are a real problem, and I know people who've sort of had lifelong conditions from it. Blackthorn stab wounds to the eye is not uncommon. I know someone else with basically his pupil on his left eye now has a segment of discoloration in it, which from being stabbed by a blackthorn when he was a kid.
Wow.
They aren't to be trifled with.
No, they're not on the same level as roses and brambles and hawthorns. These are the next stage up. These will impact your life for at least a short period of time.
Yeah, these aren't, I've been snagged by a thorn. It's like, that's going to be infected now. So it really does come down to your other health. I mean, and I'm not going to say the connection to us, but we know somebody who basically a blackthorn stab wound led to an infection, led to liver failure, led to death.
Yep.
So be careful of blackthorns. But the sloe gin is that good, it is worth taking the risk. Just got to take some precautions. So
definitely is.
I would say leather gloves are good, or at least hold the branch with a gloved hand and then pick the sloes off with the other hand. Wear eye protection.
Yeah.
Protective eyewear, glasses, something like that. I use the same face shield I use when I'm using the angle grinder for picking sloes. And when you're working with other people, and there's more than one of you picking sloes off the same branch, space out so that
definitely.
If you're pulling on this one, doesn't make that one over there whip into the other person's eye. I've seen that quite a few times. So it sounds like we're over egging this. Really do think about what it would happen if one of those branches stabbed you in the eyes, stabbed you in the face, became infected. I had one year where I could barely move a finger because every joint in that finger had a blackthorn stab wound in it, and it was like that for about a month.
I find with these things that you learn by experience is probably the best way of putting it. It's like when I was in my
punitive experience. Yeah.
Well, I'm speaking from my own experience. When I was in my early 20s and going around picking lots of fruit, getting stung by stinging nettles, getting stabbed by blackthorn, getting scratches all over my forearms from brambles and things, I just kind of shrugged it off as, it's annoying. But as the inflammation really takes hold and you're trying to go to sleep at night and things like that, you realise that actually maybe it's better to wear long sleeves and just be a little bit hot on that particular day.
Yeah.
But you do learn well from your own mistakes. Just make sure that your own mistakes aren't going to lead you down a path that you can't reverse.
I know somebody, I'm not going to say who it is, but they have basically two jobs. They plant trees and then they cut them down again. Or they do hedge laying. They get these mixed packs of native species for hedgerows. And they take out the blackthorns on any hedges they think they might be coming back to. If they're coming back there in 5 years or 8 years.
I suspect that isn't an uncommon attitude towards blackthorn.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the blackthorns, there's probably more to say about than any other, but more people do stuff with than any other. So, what comes after blackthorn? Crabapple, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
Or hawthorn.
Probably.
Because we're into October now with our.
I mean,
calendar.
hawthorn is probably just before blackthorn, in terms of actually being ripe and ready to go.
Yeah, there's a few that together.
We only went on to sloes because they're a plum, and we were talking about plums.
Yes.
So you've got your plums, your damsons, your bull aces, which, as we said, you just use them for any recipe you'd use for plums.
Yeah.
Some of them are sharper than others. And then hawthorn, berries, and crab apples, probably the same sort of time. Rose hips.
So the fruit of wild roses, those red seed things that you get there.
Yeah.
all arrive pretty much at the same time, but they've got quite a long window because a hawthorn berry will be ripe and then sit there on the shrub for 2 months and you can still make use of it.
Yeah, even a little bit longer. And the same with rose hips. Rose hips will start to go squashy once we start getting frost, but you can still pick them when they're at that stage.
Yep.
It will just be more messy.
Yep. So rundown of those rose hips, you make rose hip syrup mainly. Yep. Great source of vitamin C. There was an encouragement in the Second World War for you had this book along with the ration cards, or was available, called
Hedgerow
Harvest, which was encouraging people to go out and collect certain things for the hedgerow to boost the food that was available to them. And rose hips were of particular interest for their vitamin C content, because pretty much every source of vitamin C into Britain in the 1940s came in from a ship, and all the ships were being sunk by the rascally U-boats out in the Atlantic. So there was an encouragement to go out and pick rose hips and make rose hip syrup. Rose hip syrup doesn't have to be used medicinally, though. You can use it in cocktails, you can use it in baking, you can use it as poured on desserts. There's all sorts of things you can do with rose hip syrup. It's very good and worth making. Hawthorn berries, think of them like a tiny avocado.
Yeah, that's what they look like, and they have that creamy texture as well in the flesh, don't they?
Same kind of construction as an avocado. Big thick skin that you don't really use, big stone in the middle that you don't really use, fleshy bit in between the two. Except rather than getting it out with a spoon, you have to nibble.
Squish it out.
Yeah, squish it out and nibble around it in your mouth and spit the stone out.
Yeah.
Or you can pulverize them and use the flesh to make anything from sort of a hawthorn flour.
Yeah.
To a ketchup, to using it to make fruit leathers.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things you can do with the flesh from the hawthorn berries. And crabapple, well, as you said, this crabapple is a true species of crabapple, not just an apple that's escaped into the wild. But there's Malus sylvestris is the crabapple, and that's something that you'll find. You will tend to find more of them around where people have been.
Yeah, you do. They have an association with
old farms and
habitation and things. Yeah, settlements. But the true crabapples are small. They are quite hard, and they are very sharp in flavour.
Yes, very astringent.
Very astringent. Yeah, but they have. They hold a lot of pectin, which is what you need if you're trying to set jellies and jams and things. So you can throw them into with other fruits that don't contain much pectin, and they will have add a bit of flavour, but mostly they will set that jam. Or you can make crabapple jelly alone, which has a fantastic flavour. It doesn't have the sharpness, but it has a fantastic colour, and it does have a really good flavour. It's not as sweet. If you made a jam with golden delicious apples or something, it would be probably quite watery and not have much flavour, whereas with crab apples you have a load of flavour, and you have a nice balance between the sugar and the sour, like the sugar in the jam and the sourness of the crab apples. It goes well with game meats and things.
It's also
nice.
It's a great source of malic acid and tannic acid without the sugar that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So if you want those chemicals, I mean, there's malic acid gets used in all sorts of industrial processes and food ingredients and things like that, and skincare and cosmetics and all sorts of stuff, and it comes from apples, or at least it's a good source of it in apples. The tannins, some people use crab apples and add it to cider because they want the tannin content without the extra sugar. So they use crab apples as kind of coordinated addition to an existing cider mix.
Do you have to be careful not to put too many in, though, because they're so
acidic? You can actually kill off the fermentation. They're so astringent.
Yeah.
But a certain amount of crab apples will go into some people's cider mixes. So you've got that. Making stuff with them, crab apple and rowan berry jelly.
Yeah, that's really good.
Let's say rowan berries.
Rowan berries, yes.
We've got to talk about rowan berries. Crab apple and rowan berry jelly, which you were making this morning.
It's halfway made.
Right.
I've got the juice out of the fruits, and then the sugar will be going in later.
Yeah, and I was hoping the cat doesn't knock off the jam straining pan thing.
She won't. Yeah. She won't.
You could also slice them and put them in vodka.
You can.
And pickle them. They work quite well pickled. They sweeten up really nicely when they're pickled. So there's a lot you can do with a crab apple. And then any fruits after that, that's basically whatever's left until Christmas.
Yeah, it's just the thing that it's the hangers-on, the ones that haven't been eaten yet, isn't it?
So anything that was late to flower will be late to fruit.
Yep.
Although it won't fruit as well, it won't be as sweet, it won't be the fruits themselves won't be as big because they were developing in suboptimal conditions.
Rowan berries.
Yeah, so rowan berries, to add that back in, they are available in sort of from late August onwards right now.
This year they were early.
Yeah,
this year they were more beginning of August. I'd say they were 3 weeks early.
Yeah, so they need to be. There's not much you can do with them other than jellies and jams. You need to cook them to make them.
You have to cook them. Yeah.
Yeah, think of them like red elderberries, basically.
Yeah.
They are
different flavour.
Starchier red elderberry, different flavour. As an addition to something else, they're quite good.
Yeah, I always think that they lend themselves better to savoury things.
Yeah.
So they're better if you put them into some kind of mixed berry ketchup or sauce.
Yeah.
But not so much on their own, and not so much something that you'd put on toast or.
Inevitably, Amy ends up making some sort of hedgerow jam as well, which is a bit of everything that's left over.
Yeah, it's the kind of bags that are of indeterminate weight and things.
So it's a bit of rowan, a bit of blackberry, a bit of sloe, a bit of crabapple, a bit of
elderberry, and anything that's around. Yeah.
And often they're the best jams.
Yeah, that's true.
So that covers the main fruits. I mean, there are other things out there, but something to highlight here probably that there are a few fruity looking things or fruits that you will find in a hedgerow that will cause you harm. So notably is black bryony.
Yeah.
So it's a climber, and this thing climbs up into trees, into hedges, and will develop green and then red fruits.
Yeah, bright red, jewel-like fruits that look really attractive, I think, as well.
They look a bit like a hawthorn berry.
They do, yeah.
They look a bit like a rosehip. Mm-hmm. They look a bit like any other red berry. So, and they'll be well above ground height because they're a climber, and they'll develop the fruits halfway up the shoot. So that is probably the most notable toxic fruit lookalike that you'll see, will be the seed clusters of black bryony.
Yeah.
So we'll put a link into a photo or to the Wikipedia article or something about black bryony from this, but go and look it up. Black bryony, as in the girl's name, Bryony.
Yeah. That's definitely one to look out for because like you say, they climb and they grow at the same height as those other berries.
Yeah. And that's generally the rule with any kind of foraging and identification is you don't just go, oh, watch out for this one and be afraid of it. It's just identify everything. Identify everything you're going to put into your mouth or to your kids' mouths or wherever. Don't do it based on I think it's that. Yeah. Identify the thing. So be aware that there are things out there that could look like the thing that you're picking, and you could easily make a misidentification through laziness. Which brings us to mushrooms.
That's a good segue, sir. So fruiting bodies. There's different terms for fungi, essentially, in the different parts of fungi. I always find this whenever I'm writing something about mushrooms or fungi, I'm trying to figure out which is the best word to use, which is the one that's most recognised.
Yeah.
But strictly speaking, the mushroom is the fruiting body of the fungi. The fungi is the mycelium, so that's the actual...
Yeah, you have a fungal species.
It's like the plant, as it were, plant in inverted commas.
Yeah, the analogy I always use is that a mushroom is like the equivalent of an apple on a tree.
Yes.
The species is the entire tree. The mushroom is just the fruit.
Yeah.
It's just the fruity bit that grows up on the edge of the organism for the purposes of procreation, moving its seeds or spores, in case of mushrooms, to another place. It is a byproduct of the organism living and trying to propagate. It is not the organism itself.
No.
So the thing you see on the side of the log growing up out of the ground as a mushroom or a toadstool or whatever you're calling it is a fruit on a bush. It's a blackberry on a shrub. It's an apple on a tree. It is not a thing that you're uprooting itself.
Yeah, it's not an entire plant that you are pulling up out of the ground.
Mushrooms aren't plants either.
Exactly.
They aren't.
There's that too.
They aren't plants. They're not mammals. They have their own thing. They have their own kingdom.
They do.
And they're weird.
They are weird and wonderful.
Yeah, but if you
fantastic.
Get into mushroom stuff, then you start reading up on things like, well, maybe actually they're not native to this planet. Maybe the original mushroom spores came through the atmosphere from something else, or frozen in the ice of a comet or something like that, because they have evolved so differently to other life forms on Earth that maybe they're not actually from here. But
which is really cool.
Yeah.
And also, interesting.
But I was reading an article the other day about the Russians, and when they had Mir and they had the first space station there, they were collecting samples from the outside of the space station that were biological in nature.
Really?
Yeah, and there's this whole debate about whether there is just this biological soup that is space, and there's all these bacterium and microbes and things floating around in space, or whether it was just really poorly handled samples that got contaminated.
Ooh.
But they're basically like swiping the outside of the space station and finding out all this biological film on the outside is the story.
That's mad. But then that space station has gone through. Anyway, we're going on a tangent.
Well, it's not the space station podcast. It's barely the foraging podcast. So
mushrooms. So key mushrooms. Shall we focus on the beginning of autumn? Because basically,
well, there's one thing to cover before that.
Yeah.
Because there's two things I always try and get across to people about mushrooms. Actually, no, there's three things. So the first thing is the fruiting body. The thing you see is not the whole organism. It's only part of the organism. The organism is probably invisible to you. You won't be able to excavate it. It's so fragile. It's all these threads running through the soil, running into the trees, linking the roots together, or going up into dead wood, or whatever's the habitat for that species.
Yeah.
The second thing is that species likes to live in a certain habitat, certain soil pH, under certain trees, certain types of grasslands, certain species around it. It is choosing to live in a certain set of conditions. It won't just live anywhere. It has to live in a certain set of conditions, certain environment. So if you want to find certain mushrooms, you have to find where it lives. Or to put it another way, if you want to be good at identifying mushrooms, you've also got to be good at identifying trees, identifying habitats, identifying the thing that's growing around that mushroom that you found. The third thing is that the mushroom will only develop, the fruiting body will only develop when that organism that's in the soil, in the tree, has the right set of triggers. So for a lot of species, it's a change in moisture and a change in temperature, and maybe a change in physical pressure or physical shock. So at this time of year, we'll have sort of warmer days, and then it will suddenly rain, and that will drop the temperature in the soil very, very quickly from that ambient warm temperature day and night, from the sun being on it in the day and it not being too cool at night. But then you get a lot of rain, and it'll suddenly drop the temperature of the soil.
And suddenly raise the humidity as well.
Yeah, so increase humidity, drop in temperature. That mushroom species, those threads in the soil, that fungal species, will go, aha, now is the time. Put up a mushroom, and that mushroom will develop very, very quickly. We're talking hours. It won't develop slowly over 3 weeks. It's, that wasn't on the walk there yesterday. Or it'll be within 48, 72 hours, generally.
I think some of the best are stinkhorns for that.
Yes.
If you ever find a stinkhorn, because they go from being something that looks a bit like a potato just starting to push out of the soil, and then they'll go all the way up to being a big phallic like mushroom.
Look up a photo of a stinkhorn if you've never seen one.
Yeah,
it's very childish and funny.
But they go all the way to that within the space of 48 hours, and then that will completely disintegrate, and there will be no trace of it ever being there within another 48 hours.
Yeah.
So within 4 days, that thing has put up a fruiting body, which has then spread its spores and dissolved into nothing, all in 4 days, which is ridiculously fast.
Yes, and those kind of things, you have to be looking at the same environment again and again every day to see the changes.
Yeah.
So when we get to mushroom season and I'm actually out looking for mushrooms for work, for different things, I will be out most days into the same places. And I'll have, because of that location thing, I'll be going to, I have this place where I know I find Puccini. I have this place where I know I will find beefsteak fungus. I go to this one tree, this one dead oak tree, and I know I find chicken of the woods.
Yeah.
There's a field on a dairy farm not far from our friend Alistair's place that is, it's puffball heaven. It's giant puffball heaven.
It looks like somebody has just released an entire, I don't know, helicopter full of footballs across the field.
Yeah, huge things. And then there's just cows wandering around them, standing on them, spreading the spores, which is why they're doing so well there. But that habitat, conditions, organism versus fruiting body, those three things are the secret to mushroom foraging. Because you need to go to the right place, in the right conditions, and be looking for the right thing.
It's very much right place, right time.
It's not a random event.
No.
It is predictable to a point. Keep that in the back of your mind. Any conversation we have about mushrooms. So, okay, time of year. There are mushrooms available in the British countryside all year round. Edible mushrooms all year round. But most of them are available from August through to November.
Yeah, it's very back-end weighted.
And a lot of that's to do with that. You've gone from warm and dry conditions to cooler, wet conditions. And when those fruiting bodies will appear will be dictated by the environment, by the season beforehand, how dry the summer was, how wet the summer was. I'm hoping for a good crop of mushrooms this year because of the summer has been so wet, and so is everyone I talk to about mushrooms. But if you're thinking the same thing, bear in mind it can actually be too wet because you don't get that change.
Yeah.
You don't go from hot and dry to cold and wet quickly because it's already warm and wet.
What we need right now is for a spell of several weeks of hot, dry weather, and then for it to start just being torrential for a couple of weeks, and that will really trigger, and the temperature to drop down.
Yes.
That's what we need. Essentially, what we're looking for is like traditional seasons as we think of them. That's how it used to be.
With a hard edge
where you
between
actually,
them,
where you actually had summer, which lasted several months and was relatively hot and dry, and then autumn came, and that's when the rain appeared, and basically that's what it feels like living in Manchester for most of the year. So you just have rain, just constant rain. So that's what you want that sudden rainy period. And it's something that really gets me, because I went out, we've had a kind of dry spell, and then we had some rain, but it wasn't a lot. But I was really hoping when I went out yesterday to the woods that it would have triggered our chanterelle patch, but it hasn't.
I think it's a bit too late.
So disappointing. It still looks really dry on that bank as well. I think the rain wasn't enough to really
It's not getting through
down.
The tree canopy, no.
No, not at all. So that's something else to think of. When you were talking about right place, right time, that's something else that springs to mind for me, is that you could go to a woodland which is normally fantastic for fungi, but for mushrooms, but not see anything unless you've had those right triggers. So doing repeated visits to the same locations is key if you actually want to find things.
You can't just go to the right place. We get people asking me saying, "Oh, where can I find this?" It's like, well, I have found species like that in places like this.
Yeah. But it's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed. People have sort of an expectation. People suddenly think they're available now, and they just go to the right place and they're there. So no, you're being told what to do by nature, basically. Nature is going to tell you when you can collect these things, when they'll be available, whether there'll be enough available, whether they'll be available for a long enough period for you to notice it. So if you need to do this over several years. You need to build up a patch that okay, I have found this species here. But what were the conditions when I found it? What was the year like before that? Because then you can start to, if you get those conditions again 2 years later, you go, oh yeah, that might be the patch up behind the church or wherever. Might get some. Mushroom foraging is more like hunting than any other aspect of foraging. It is because you have an elusive quarry that is hard to spot at times.
Yep.
You have to be in the right place at the right time. You've got to put the hours in. You've got to put the you got to put the shoe leather time in.
You have to go off the beaten track often as well. You have to
And
go
you're competing
battling
with other
through the
people.
Yes, you have to go battling through the undergrowth. You're competing with other people and other animals,
Yeah.
things that essentially predate on mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's not the right word, but they eat them.
If you're a vegan, if you're somebody, or you're completely anti-hunting in every sense, you never kill an animal for food.
Mm-hmm.
And you struggle to understand why somebody would want to shoot a deer for food or something like that. Take the feeling that you get when you find edible mushrooms. That is exactly what it's like when you're deer stalking for the pot, for the table. It's the same part of your brain that's being activated. It's the same wiring that's being used.
I like that comparison.
It is hunting. For me, it's exactly the same thing. In terms of identification, it's like any other foraging. You have to identify every single thing. The problem with mushrooms is that they are not easy to discreetly identify based on just a couple of factors, because they develop so quickly. And you've got a guidebook in front of you that has a photograph of a mushroom in one state. Well, the thing in front of you might be that mushroom in the guidebook photo in about 6 hours or 12 hours, or with different conditions. And it can go from a jelly bean size thing to something with a stem and a cap that's the size of a small frying pan in 2 days.
Yeah.
And think about the shape and colour changes it's going to go through from that. You have to look at all the factors that identify that mushroom in it, and you might be able to recognise all of those things, but just not on that specimen. Every season I come across something where I go, I think it's this, but I'm not absolutely sure. And what you tend to find with the really famous edible species, they're not the best tasting, they're not the finest, they're not the rarest. What they are is actually quite clearly easy to identify because they have a very distinct set of features. That's the other thing with it. When people say they have their people, their country, their culture has a cultural attachment to foraging, and this goes right across Europe and into other countries, or foraging for mushrooms, I should say. When you go and speak to those people and you go and look at what they do, actually they're gathering the same 20 or 30 species again and again from often the same places that their parents, their grandparents, someone else showed them, or the same habitats. They're not good at mushroom identification. What they're good at is recognizing the same things they've been shown to be safe, which is different to identifying every mushroom that you see there.
It's a little bit like knowing where there's a good patch of good flavoured blackberries. Reverting back to those fruits, but you
Blackberry obsession of Amy.
You return to the same patch because you know that those ones are good.
Yes, you have a good patch.
Yeah, and with mushrooms, it's that same tradition.
Yeah.
But with certain, I mean, the whole cultural love or hate of mushrooms. There's like backgrounds in language and all sorts of things that are associated with mycophilia and mycophobia, which is the kind of like and dislike of
love of mushroom and
mushrooms.
Hatred of mushroom.
Yeah. There's fear. There's a lot to do with the language and cultural associations and who held the knowledge. So druids in the UK used to know all of the things about mushrooms, and
that was there's this theory that basically to understand it you have to be a naturalist, and at a time where that was knowledge that was held orally and mentally.
Yes, and you were only given that information if you were part of that group. You were only told it wasn't readily available and kind of passed out amongst
and you had to have a status within your tribe, within your group, within your community that, right, you're going to be the person that knows stuff. You're going to be the person that knows how to read the moon to tell us how many days until the next full moon. You're going to be the person that tells us, right, this is when the sun's going to start appearing above that cliff face again. You're going to be the person that tells us when to find these mushrooms. You're going to be the person that tells us when the salmon are going to return. That would have been an important role in a hunter-gatherer community.
Hugely
or
so.
Even sort of early farming communities. But the mushroom identification knowledge would have been part of that, but people seem to separate out mushrooms from that.
Yeah, I think there's probably religious connotations and things to do with shapes and all sorts. There's a lot to unpack when you start looking at mushrooms and why people in some cultures seem to have more affiliation to them than others.
And that comes into how people interpret them and interpret the risk as well.
Yeah.
So we've got a foraging course the day after tomorrow.
We do.
We're going to have people on that talking. We're going to talk to them about mushroom foraging. There will be people there who will say they've come on the course because they want to forage for mushrooms, but they're too afraid to. I can guarantee, I'll put my life on it now, there'll be somebody there, that was their motivation for coming, because we see that so often. Mushroom foraging, in terms of the species, isn't really any more dangerous than foraging for plants. The issue is that identification, and the fact that identification of them clearly is much harder with mushrooms than it is for plants. There are something like 14 to 15,000 species of non-microscopic fungi in the UK. There are about 20 to 25 which will cause you immediate death or immediate very serious illness.
Yeah.
There are lots of others that will make you mildly ill.
Yeah.
Stomach upsets, vomiting, skin stuff, that kind of thing. But deadly, I've eaten this and now I'm dead level, there's not that many.
If you're a kind of healthy, full-grown human, I'm assuming that relates to,
you know, like ill health and things.
Yeah, or if you're a child.
But there are more poisonous things in your local supermarket than there are in the local woodland. But they don't have labels on them, these mushrooms.
No.
They don't clearly say this is what they are.
Or a little skull and crossbones, even.
And there's no one taking liability for not labelling them.
Nope.
So the risk comes from the fact that you have to identify everything, and it's harder to identify mushrooms. But if you think about plants and leaves and things like that, we mentioned black bryony for fruits. What about berries?
They're not a good thing to be eating.
No,
not if you take the seed in.
No, and there's always be somebody saying, "Oh, well, you just have to spit the seed out." It's like, all right, but berries aren't that good.
No, they're not.
And it's just a party trick to say you can eat the flesh, but the seeds are deadly toxic. Leaves are toxic. We just in this woodland we have hemlock water dropwort. We have nightshades.
Yep.
We have all sorts
arum, which doesn't kill you, but it's not nice.
Yeah. There's other hemlocks. There's all sorts of other things that are very, very common. Will grow in the British countryside. You will have passed them all. You have passed at least 2 or 3 of these species over this summer. No one really gets excited about the fact that they're there. They just sort of mention, oh yeah, just be careful when you're doing elderflowers because sometimes it might be hemlock.
There's also plants that you grow in your garden, which are toxic if you eat them. You just don't eat them because they're plants that you're growing in your garden to look at.
Yes, and there's some things that are toxic in great quantity. If you eat handfuls of it become toxic, or you reach a toxic level. Like
mushrooms aren't
wood
special.
sorrel. Yeah, and there's other things like there's risks from foraging for leaves in meadows that have sheep that have just been fluke drenched because there'll be liver flukes will be thrown out onto the micro mollusks growing on those leafy things, and then you can ingest them, and
then you have a little friend.
Yeah, you have a little liver killing friend.
Yeah.
So there are risks associated with foraging, not just mushroom foraging. It's just people get really excited about mushroom foraging. Although on the other side of that, we will soon be getting the photos from friends saying, oh, I did something with field mushrooms. And you say, which ones were they? Go, well, they were the white ones growing in the field. So I just reply back with a photo of something like Roger Phillips's mushrooms. Just open on one of the pages that shows about 20 different species, which all look the same and are all white.
Yeah.
And say, well, is it one of these? And then flip the page. Is it one of these? Flip the page. Is it one of these? And then they stop talking to me. But there are more species out there than people realise of mushrooms. I suppose that's one of the other things for identification. There are so many species.
There are, and there are a lot that look alike.
Yes.
And they don't even have to be in the same family to look similar. So there's a lot to unpack, to look at with mushrooms. There's a lot of different features to look at with them. But once you understand what you're looking at, and once you've seen the edible species and you've got your eye in and you know what the features are to look out for to confirm that that is the thing that you have in your hand, then it becomes a heck of a lot less scary.
Mm.
You can then approach it, I think, with more confidence as well.
It's just a system like any other.
It is, yeah. It's
and you
just
have to understand the system, understand all the aspects of the system. That it's not just what does this mushroom look like. It's where is it growing? What time of year is it growing? What led up to it growing? What are the other factors that are other than just what it looks like from the side or from top down?
Yeah, it's looking at all the different features. Like you say, it's not only it's where it's growing, it's the habitat it's in, it's the time of year, and then it's looking at all the different bits of it. It's not the same as berries and going, well, it looks like this and it has the right leaves to be this, so therefore it must be this. It's a red berry thing that's growing on a plant with leaves that are hawthorn leaves, so therefore it's hawthorn berries. With mushrooms, you have to look more closely at things. It's the habitat, it's the time of year, and then looking at it and going, right, it's got this colour top, it's got this colour gills or pores or whatever, and then going even further and looking at the bottom of it, and just there's more effort involved.
There are more things to look for in a mushroom as well. So
there's more features, yes.
Yeah, does it have gills or pores? If it does have gills, what shape are the gills? What are the cross-section of the gills? What is the shape of the stem? How does the stem attach to the cap? How does the stem attach to the gills? Do they attach to the gills or are they separate? Is there a ring on the stem? Is the ring free floating or is it attached? Is there a ring actually attached all the way out to the edge of the cap and it's growing out that way?
Is there like a basket at the bottom of the stem that it's all sat in? Is the stem smooth? Has it got a pattern to it? Is the cap slimy or dry or cracked?
At the bottom of the stem or...
Yeah. Is it even a cap and stem, or is it just a big ball that appears to be growing straight out of the ground or straight out to the side of a tree? Or there's just so many different things, and I think that's part of what gets people with it as well.
Well, if you think about it in terms that a mushroom is part of an entire group, just like a dolphin and a human and a chimpanzee are all mammals.
Yeah.
The difference in, say, between a chanterelle and a giant puffball isn't like saying, oh, it's the difference between a chimpanzee and an orangutan.
No.
It's like saying, it's the difference between a chimpanzee and broccoli.
Which is a bigger difference.
It's a huge difference. And if you said, okay, describe all the possible variations between all fish, all mammals, and all plants and all insects. That
basically encompasses mushrooms.
Yeah, right. Okay, how many legs does this thing have? Does it have legs? Does it have fins? Does it have 6 legs? Does it have 8 legs? Does it have 2?
Yeah.
Does it have 4? Are they arms or are they legs? You know, if you broke everything down, eventually you'd work out it was a chimpanzee.
Yeah, you would. It would take you a longer time to get there, wouldn't it?
But you wouldn't say, oh yeah, you know, it's just watch out for the ape-like things. You'd have to, you know, I've got to identify this ape-like thing. Is it Bill who runs a corner shop or is it a chimpanzee? You know, which one is it? Okay, well, let's go through the flow chart and try and work out what it is. It's exactly the same thing for a mushroom. So mushrooms are harder work, they're harder to find, they're harder to identify, they're sometimes harder to work with in the kitchen. I mean, most fried mushrooms are basically a delivery vessel for butter and garlic.
They do that well, though.
They do that very well.
Very, very well.
But because they are so hard to work with, they also have an extra value in the kitchen because to do it well means a lot of effort has happened before it even got into the kitchen. So mushrooms are something we do a lot with every year. Maybe we've got some... In fact, I need to reply back to him. I just remembered. Sorry, Jonathan. We have got some mushroom episodes coming up later in the year.
We do.
But
I'm very excited for that particular mushroom episode.
Yes. This is a big part of our wild food calendar, is from now until Christmas. Best game, some of the best fishing, best foraging.
Yeah.
If you are going to go out and do something with foraging this autumn, then let us know. Tag us in your photos. You can tag us on @wildfoodpeople on Instagram, and we're on TikTok, and I do a bit on stuff on there. We're on Twitter and all this, or X, whatever the hell it is now.
And Facebook, for those of you who are still on Facebook.
Yeah, and find us on there and tag us in your stuff and let us know what you do with it. And if you've got any questions, let us know. Don't just send us blurry phone photos of the top of a mushroom and say, what's this? I'm just going to ignore it. Or I'll just send you a link to a guidebook and say, go and buy a bloody guidebook. But do something with it. Because if you are interested in wild food, if you're interested in finding food in different ways, go and do something this autumn because you are in the best period. You don't have to wait for wild garlic next year or anything like that. Go and do something now. Go and do something interesting with a blackberry.
Yeah.
We've also got our website, which is wildfoodpeople.co.uk. There's a species directory on there. It's on the homepage. There's a link out from there. It's in the menu. There's a links in the notes for this episode.
Yeah, there will be.
That they link out to the different species, but have a look in the different species in there, and there's some recipes and other things on there. We've got some other content on there as well, and other videos that we're trying to get together. We have a Patreon, which means that that's a way you can show support for this show, because it does cost money to produce this podcast, and equipment and time and hosting and all of these other things. So that does take a bit of money. So if you can help offset our costs a little bit, we'll reward you with extra content and early access to things. There's a small juvenile robin.
Extremely distracted because there's a very fluffy juvenile robin that's just decided to land on the table right next to us.
I'd take a photo, but basically the robin is sat on my phone on the table.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get more distracted comments like that and other behind the scenes stuff and other things, we have our Patreon. You can sign up for it there. It's only a couple of quid every month. It's really not much, but we will make good use of your money. We won't just spend it on gin, and if we do spend it on gin, we'll fill it with sloes. And then take a photo of it and share the recipe with you.
That's it. Yeah, that's a good bargain, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, if you like the show, if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and there's an option to review the show, please do that, because it makes a hell of a difference to us, and it helps us reach out to new people and so on. And if you think other people will like this podcast, then share it with them. Share any of our things, because we want to speak to more people and speak to new people and just have more conversations about wild food.
We do.
The Wild Food People podcast was recorded in a woodland where there's a pheasant over there, there's a robin there, and there's some sort of tarmac laying machine over there. It is a rural and outdoor production.